V'daber Hashem el Moshe, Achri Moshe b'nei Aaron. Hashem spoke to Moshe after the passing of the two sons of Aaron. The Korvosam lefnei Hashem yamusu, when they came close before Hashem, and that's why they died. Now, in last week's 2 weeks ago's reading, when we spoke about the death of Bnei Aaron on the 8th day when they were installed to be Kohanim, the Torah says they brought a strange fire, a Zorah, an alien fire, and they were struck down. So there's a question, why exactly did they die? Did they die because they should have consulted with Moshe before they brought the fire, and because they did not consult, therefore the fire was considered an alien fire, was unacceptable? Well, no, they had drunk wine, and because they weren't in a state that they were appropriately fit to officiate, therefore they were struck down. It's an argument, okay? But after they were struck down, Moshe says to Aaron, the crow, that I knew that somebody would die on the day it was inaugurated, and originally I had thought it would be you or I, because Hashem had said to Moshe, "Bekrovei HaKodesh," those who are closest to me, through them I will be sanctified. Rashi cites the Midrash. So originally I thought it'd be you or me, because I thought we were the greatest, but now that they were taken, that indicates they were greater than we are, and therefore they are the Krovim, they are the closest to Hashem. And the Torah says, Vayidom Aaron. Aaron remained silent. So the simple understanding there is, what's the Vayidom? Why did he remain silent? He accepted God's verdict. Without question, to lose two sons who were the most special Jews, upcoming leaders of Klal Yisrael, they were going to be Moshe's and our successors, being struck down, not to question, say a word, Vayidom, he remained silent. That's the simple understanding. However, if you look in the Sefarno on the word Vayidom Aaron, he remained silent, Moshe said to him, originally I thought it would be you or I, but now that it was them, that indicates they are greater than we are, that the Kiddush Hashem that took place by them being taken is an indication they are more special. So we explained, why did somebody like of their stature had to be taken? In what way were they greater than Moshe? I mean, Moshe is the greatest Jew who ever lived. Aaron was the most special. But to bring out this point, they were more qualified to bring out this point because that was their only sin. The only sin that they had was that they had chosen to act on their own accord without consulting, which had to do with the degree of they felt that they were sufficiently qualified, they didn't have to consult. Or the reason why they drank the wine is for the same reason. It's basically, it's coming from the same source. So because that was the own sin, you say, from one sin, do you take a person so special with such a future, with such a potential? When it comes to the attribute of justice, as perfect as you are, unless you toe the line the way you're supposed to, Hashem doesn't play favorites. Hatzur Tomim Polo. God's justice is perfect. So to bring out that point and magnify it, unquestionably, this sets the record that as special as you are, there are times where Hashem will take that person, and God doesn't play favorites. If you're not where you should be, God will take that person. So since Moshe and Aaron had other failings, I would use Chas Shem, the word a checkered past, but they had other failings on their record. So to bring out and magnify this point, only Nadon Viu could be the ones who are able to bring this point to that level of clarity. That's Bekrovei HaKodesh. So the Sefarno learns over there that when Moshe explained this to Aaron, it was a consolation. To give him an understanding, so he remained silent because he was actually consoled that his children were used as the symbols of Kiddush Hashem for all time. It's like a person who gives his life to sanctify God's name. This is the ultimate usage of life for the level of sanctification. Therefore, that was the consolation. It's not they sinned. It's to be used for that, communicate that understanding of what? Of Bekroi HaKodesh, that God doesn't play favorites. It's not just he accepted it. It's only, the consolation was that he felt privileged that his children were used for this purpose. I'll give you an example. We speak with Asuri Rugi Malchus, the 10 martyrs. Rabbi Akiva was the greatest of all the 10 martyrs, and he was taken. So there's Norach Chaim HaKodesh, I think it's the Parshas Kedoshim, which is this coming, it's a double parsha, where he cites a Pirkei Rebbe Lezer, that why did Rabbi Akiva deserve to be taken and to be tortured the way he was tortured? The reason, it says explicitly, is because there was a decree they were not permitted to teach Torah to teach Torah. Rabbi Akiva defied the decree, and because he defied it, he was arrested, and he was put to death, and as it says, as he was tortured, they scathed the flesh off his body. So, but what exactly was his failing? What was his sin? You have to have some degree of culpability to be taken, especially in such a manner. So the Pirkei Rebbe Lezer says that because Rabbi Akiva, he was once giving a shir in Yerushalayim, and there were 600,000 people who attended that Torah lecture, which he had given. And when he was giving that shir, he had a fleeting feeling of pride that his setting was the equivalent of Kabbalah Satorah, 600,000 males above the age of 20. So because he had that fleeting moment of pride, therefore he deserved to be taken in this manner. So Reb Chaim HaKadosh asks a question. I mean, you say, you shouldn't have even a fleeting moment of pride, but to be tortured and to suffer such a death for such a seemingly minor infraction. So he goes to explain over there that of course not. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the more special a person is, and Hashem takes him for whatever reason, it itself is an atonement for Klal Yisrael. I mean, to take a person who's totally innocent, even for the benefit of Klal Yisrael, Hashem, based on midas mishpat, based on justice, God can't do that. God has to find a reason, some degree of failing, and that's sufficient reason. So it meets the profile of what justice is. You shouldn't have had it. But the reason why God's taken, not because he shouldn't have done that, but rather because since Klal Yisrael needs merit, and he says Rabbi Akiva's life being taken till the end of time, till Bias Mashiach, we're still beneficiaries of that Rabbi Akiva being taken for disseminating Torah publicly. So I once explained it with Chazon Ish. The Chazon Ish, we mentioned there was a story, Rabbi Zalman Meltzer, who was the elder of the Rosh Hashivas in Yerushalayim, in Israel, in the world at the time. He was the father of Rav Aaron Kotler. Besides being a tzaddik and being a Rosh Hashiva, being everything. And after the state of Israel was established, a bomb went off in the old city of Yerushalayim, or where he lived in the Meshia Arim area, and he was wounded with shrapnel in his leg. So they came to the Chazon Ish and they said to him, it wasn't life-threatening, but he was wounded. So they said to the Chazon Ish, a person like Rabbi Zalman Meltzer, the tzaddik, the elder tzaddik of the generation, he should be subject to this kind of wound, this injury. So he said to him, this is what he said, he explained it, the Chazon Ish. Whenever we speak about, we say, when a tzaddik is taken, it's an atonement for the generation. It doesn't mean to say each person has his own record he has to deal with. And we learn from here, why is the passing of the sons of Aaron juxtaposed to Yom Kippur? Because just as Yom Kippur is mechaper, as Yom Kippur atones, mis tzaddikim is mechaperes. The death of tzaddikim also atones. Now, I mean, when a tzaddik dies and it atones, that means each person doesn't have his personal record that he has to deal with to do tshuva. Each person still has to do his own personal tshuva for whatever failings we have. What it means, there are times there's a prosecution on Klal Yisrael. Hashem says, Satan is the prosecutor of the Jewish people, and he's always knocking on God's door. God, we have to punish him. The Jews, the balance is off balance, and he wants always to prosecute us. And Hashem says, you know something? I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to hear from you. It's not the right moment. Come back some other time. And because he always shuns the Satan with his prosecutions, the record is not audited. And as long as the record is not audited, what happens? Midas HaRachmim is in place. Although the record is far from perfect. But if Satan should start prosecuting, Chas v'Sholom, nobody has a perfect record, then everybody's vulnerable to the attribute of justice. So the reason why the attribute of justice is not in place is because Hashem says, I don't want to hear from you. But there's a time where the basis for his prosecution becomes so overwhelming, Hashem has to let him come through that front door. And Chas v'Sholom, if he comes through that front door, it's disastrous. Because that means the record of the Jewish people are being audited. So we speak about Midas, the death of tzaddikim, atone. It means that when he comes with this claim that Klal Yisrael, their records have to be audited, Hashem says, I don't want to hear it. So this is what Chazon Ish explained it. He says, if Rabbi Zalman Meltzer wouldn't have been wounded, there would have had to been minimally 100,000 casualties. Why? So he explains, Rabbi Zalman Meltzer is wounded, not life-threatening. So Satan says, what about the rest of them? So he says, my most beloved son, my most special son, Rabbi Zalman Meltzer. You mean that's not enough for you? You're not satisfied? You know something? Disappear, I don't want to look at you. But if it wouldn't have been a person as special as Rabbi Zalman Meltzer, who was the tzaddik and the elder Rosh Hashiva of the generation, God forbid, satisfying that prosecution, 100,000 Jews would have to be taken. So therefore, when we say tzaddikim mechapim alador, the tzaddik atones for the generation, the tzaddik's personal experience, he's the equivalent of 100,000 people in terms of God, in God's eyes. So therefore, that's sufficient to silence Satan. This is the way the Chazon Ish explained it. So Rabbi Akiva, being one of the most special Jews who ever lived, a man like that to being taken for disseminating Torah. So what's the reason? You have to have some kind of claim. The claim is he had this fleeting moment of pride because he felt it was the equivalent of God giving Torah at Sinai, because there were 600,000 people there. You know, it's not appropriate. But for not appropriate, you don't take a person like Rabbi Akiva for what did he do? Because he had that fleeting moment. You just have to have a reason. Once there's a reason, Hashem could use him as the one to be taken. Once he's taken, his value is so infinitely great that till the end of time, the prosecution of Klal Yisrael is dulled, is silenced, and the edge is taken off of it, and that schus is till the end of time. That's the understanding of the Orach Chaim HaKodesh. The story of Avram ben Avram, the famous convert, who was the prince of Poland, and he converted to Judaism, and he had a special relationship with the Vilna Gaon. He was put to death because he converted to be a Jew. And the Franciscan order who captured him said to him, because you're the prince, normally you'd be put to death regardless. But because you're the prince, if you publicly disavow your commitment to Judaism, we'll let you continue to live and you'll be reinstated as the Prince of Poland. And he owned Poland. He was the prince. His father was the king of Poland. He says, I'm not interested. I will die and I will sanctify God's name. And they burnt him. There were thousands of Gentiles that were witnessing this public burning. So after he was killed, he was burnt to death, and he said Shema Yisrael publicly. The Vilna Gaon said he had a special, and the Vilna Gaon said if he wants to be saved, based on a Kabbalistic incantation, he can take him out of there to be saved. He says no. Here, God gave him the opportunity to sanctify his name in public, especially being the Prince of Poland, giving it all up for Hashem. He wants to be the sacrifice to sanctify God's name. And he died, and he was burnt to death. So the Vilna Gaon said that the Gemara speaks about that when we wake up in the morning, you have to wash your hands because this contaminated spirit on your hand, it's called basteyo. And it's almost lethal. And the Gemara speaks about how lethal it is. So the Vilna Gaon says as a result of the Kiddush Hashem of the Avram ben Avram, the Ger, the convert, that spirit, which was so lethal, was dulled. It doesn't have that force any longer, because the schus of the Kiddush Hashem of the Ger, that he gave his life, silenced it forever till the end of time, that cannot actually wreak the havoc which it normally could wreak, if one does not wash his hands properly in the morning when he awakens. That's what the Vilna Gaon said. So again, it's similar to what we speak of Rabbi Akiva. The value of Rabbi Akiva giving his life, this dimension of person, what the world was lacking because he was taken, especially now it's appropriate, it's during the time that 24,000 of his students were taken during this period of time. And what's the claim against them? Shalom Nogu Kovitzev said they weren't appropriately respectful to one another. We're not talking about they were disrespectful. They should have been to a greater degree. They weren't, therefore God takes 24,000. You know what it means to take 24? These people are Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim, his students, they weren't ordinary people. But only because they were so special, the standard was a different standard. But what's the value of taking those Talmidim? It set the record, it silenced prosecution for endless times. We find the Chofetz Chaim had said, now, even when we bench Rosh Chodesh, we said Avarachmim. Alan is a Gabbai, he knows this, right? We said Avarachmim when we bench Rosh Chodesh Iyar. Why? Because it's a sphera. So therefore, since it's a sphera, because during the 1600s, there were pogroms in Eastern Europe. It was called Tachtat by Chmelnytsky, the Tatar, where a good part of Eastern Europe was wiped out, was annihilated. So because this moment time was such a tragic time, therefore, we say Avarachmim even when we bench Rosh Chodesh. That's the reason why. So the Chofetz Chaim pointed out that whenever you find a level of Holocaust, it was the equivalent of the Holocaust, not mechanized. It was similar to the Crusades. You always find after that there's a resurgence of Torah of one of a kind. Because the Shach lived then. The next generation was the Vilna Gaon. Right after this, the Vilna Gaon was born. And yet people exceptional, which was out of the ordinary, people rose to greatness in Torah, which didn't exist for a number of generations. Why then? Only because Klal suffered such a level of tragedy, Satan is silenced for a very long time. And therefore, normally, they're not worthy of that level of understanding in Torah. To have such great Torah sages. Hashem says, you know something? Now, I'm going to give it the full infusion of divine inspiration, levels of opportunity. The Torah is able to soar to an unbelievable heights. And that's why you find after that, there was such a level of advancement of Torah, even after the Holocaust. America was relatively speaking, if the Torah leaders from Europe didn't come to the United States would be the equivalent of a desolate desert, spiritually speaking. When they came, the United States became a different reality. It's the same thing. Because after having the Holocaust, 6 million Jews and all the Torah institutions being destroyed and devastated, Hashem says, now it's time for rebuilding, and therefore there was this surge and the soaring to that special level.